Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of The Green Room. And once again, today I'm joined by James.
Hi there, Nick. And we're joined by Harry.
Hello.
And she's still a little bit scared about being in front of the camera, but shortly.
Is that a threat?
So
yes.
We'll get her in the peripheries and then eventually to the front.
Exactly. How are you guys getting on? That's actually both now.
I'm very well, actually. I'm a bit sad about all the lack of sport. The football season's finished.
Yes. Are you, Harry,
I am
sad
not
about
upset
that?
about that at all.
But Wimbledon's going to start soon, so that's always
excited
fun.
about Wimbledon.
Yes.
Very
and we've got
excited.
the Cricket World Cup still on, so yeah. A few things to look forward to, but it's all a bit,
And
start.
great news about Liverpool winning the Champions League.
Oh yeah, of course. Well done,
Yeah,
James.
you
Thanks for that
talked
detail.
I literally didn't know about that.
Okay, fine. How did Man United get on? Were they involved?
Not next year or the year after that.
Right. What are we talking about today?
Shoot shot. Today we're talking about electric cars, so it's a bit of an introduction. I'm sure it's a topic that we're going to talk lots and lots more about.
I thought so.
Technology develops over time, but I'd say significantly developed to a point that they are getting more and more in the news with climate change news coming to the forefront over the last week or so, quite topical. Electric cars being mentioned because, of course, a third of emissions is through transportation, as you may or may not know. So obviously electric cars both in the domestic front and commercial front can do a lot to meet our zero carbon reduction targets by 2050.
And I'm not going to pretend I do this every day, but I cycled to work this morning.
Well done.
And I cycled by the A3, and it's pretty miserable actually. It's felt kind of, I needed one of those little masks.
Well, it's brilliant actually because you probably hoovered up a lot of those fuses.
Fine. Okay, so I'm single-handedly saving the planet. Good. Okay, so we're talking about electric cars. Where did we start?
Well, when did you? So we discussed about. Well, we wrote about this back in 2012. We went to a few shows at the time. I think the one that stands in my in the forefront is the EcoBuild at the time. Wasn't it?
EcoBuild. Yeah.
And they had a whole section on electric vehicles, and then they were talking lots of acronyms at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember we were looking at it at the time, and
we got to test one.
Yes.
Were you in the same car as me, or did we have?
No, it was a
separate
test.
Okay, yeah. So we had little Nissan Leafs, didn't we? Were they Nissan Leafs?
So I tested a Zoe, the Renault Zoe, actually.
Oh, maybe that's what I tested.
You're in
it was
the Leaf.
very
You're
memorable.
in the Leaf. I was in the
memorable car.
I was in the Renault Zoe.
Okay, and so let's just talk about it very quickly. So electric car, it doesn't actually. Well, I mean, we're talking about hybrids as well, but as soon as we go electric car, it includes a lot more than just a car that has a great big battery in, and therefore you charge it every night and it runs. There's loads and loads of different types and specifics that we're going to kind of cover. Basically they were introduced actually ages and ages ago, but petrol cars, diesel cars.
They won the battle of the day, didn't they?
Yeah, they did back in the day, and so they became really, really popular. And obviously, there's massive advantages, or there were massive advantages, and they're becoming kind of matched now by electric car performance. And one of the main ones was that I can go and fill up my car with a tank of fuel, and I can drive sort of 600 miles, and then I can refuel it, and then I'm good to go again. And it takes 2 minutes?
That's if you lift and coast.
That's if you lift and coast. Yeah. But that's so it takes a couple of minutes to fill the tank.
Yeah.
And then obviously go and pay. And so the whole process takes about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas with electric cars, one of the issues was, until Tesla sort of hit the scene really, is that electric cars take a little bit longer to charge. So if I want to drive from London to Bristol, and I need to stop halfway. And
that's the technological challenge of batteries. So the charge takes a lot longer than the discharge. So normally it's a disproportional kind of concept, but technology is moving, I'd say, in the right direction. And that
I think is, as more and more get built, and that is obviously the major hurdle and the barrier to entry electric cars have been facing. So, two things, which we'll cover in a sec, but cost is another one. But this range limitation, if they can find ways of getting over that, then you're sort of removing one of the big hurdles to uptake of electric cars. So, Where do you want to start? Do you want to start
So let's lots of acronyms being exchanged out in the market, and lots of but so it'd be worthwhile just to cover each one in a bit more detail. Talk about examples, because that's what will resonate with people out there.
Okay, so let's start with the first one, which is your battery electric car, right? So this has no petrol, no diesel engine at all. It is 100% electric. You are charging it as and when you need to, as and when the battery runs flat. The benefits, obviously, you're driving it, and there are zero emissions. It is much cheaper currently to sort of charge your car and run it than the equivalent petrol car.
Yeah.
The major issues, the two, are one, it's expensive, and two, and this is a little bit of a grey area, but the range of most of them is very limited still.
Yes.
So you're kind of, if you're driving around the city, if you live in London, for example, and you have a little electric car and it does 50 miles, you can drive and do all your journeys in a day, come back, charge it, and life's good. But if I'm commuting from here to, where would I go?
So yes, basically what you're saying is it's good as your secondary vehicle. So one to do your local shopping. If you're say commuting locally on a daily basis, it might do the whole week. But not as your primary vehicle if you're wanting to do intercity journeys.
Exactly, and also unlike a petrol car that you can get 100,000 miles minimum. I mean, you probably get 500,000 miles out of a petrol car now, or a diesel car. An electric car, you're charging a battery, and they have
limited lifespan.
Yeah, exactly. You can only charge it so many times.
So examples there that we've used of typical electric cars. So you used the one earlier, so Nissan Leaf.
And it was, to be fair, I don't remember which one I was driving, but if I was driving the Nissan Leaf, it was nice, right? And it's a fun car to drive. It's very small, but fully electric. One of the issues, with a mobile phone, right? And when you take a picture with a mobile phone, it makes an artificial noise of taking a picture. Do you see what I mean? Like an old camera, right? So
the clicking sound,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Petrol cars, and I think Tesla bought something out, but I think electric cars, so fully battery electric cars, or BEVs as they're called, they need something that is a little bit more like a car when it drives. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise you've got this car driving behind you and you can't even hear it.
So that was one of the problems. So when I know they're not fully electric at the minute, but in Formula One, which I'm a massive fan of, when they brought the hybrid engines in, so all the noise behind, one of those really loud aircraft type sounding engines took a lot of the fun out of the racing.
When I was very small, and I'm not a fan of Formula One, but I went to Silverstone when I was very, very small, and those cars make a racket. It is unbelievable.
You feel it, so all your organs start to shake, and you can hear it from a million miles away. Whereas the kind of the hybrids of the series, I think they've got sort of a bit better, but they kind of took the fun out of it a little bit for me.
Mine was more of a safety aspect. You can't hear the cars coming.
Yeah, well, I mean the other thing, but the good aspect about them. So when I drove the Zoe, when I test drove the Zoe, I was surprised at how quickly the acceleration is, and that's the advantage of a petrol car. There's no kind of that.
Put your foot down, nothing happens.
Yeah, that kind of gradual acceleration.
It's instantaneous, isn't it?
So that's good, but obviously limited by the distance.
Yeah, and so we've got one of the limitations here in front of us that is there's no backup, right? So if your battery dies, you're stuck. That would be the same as a petrol car.
Yes.
Right? So if you run out of petrol, you're still stuck. The issue there is that you can most people will be able to walk from wherever a car is wherever a car has run out of fuel to a petrol station, fill up a little plastic jerry can, walk back, put it in the tank and drive to the petrol station before filling up the car properly. Or, call the RAC and they might give you a bit of fuel. If you have a battery car, and it runs out of juice, you've got a lot more of an issue.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happens. I don't know if the RAC can come and give you a charge. Does that exist as a thing?
That's an interesting question. It'd be quite good to find that out.
Yeah.
But slightly to kind of move on to the positive side of it, they are improving. So the Tesla Model 3 that you were talking about earlier, But even the earlier Teslas,
the
it's
Tesla
at least a
Sport
couple of
ones,
hundred miles.
and the rest. I mean, you have to pay more for a battery, and this is what's infuriating. You're getting the same car, but you're getting an extra 100 miles for each kind of version you step up. But the cost increments of doing that is enormous, and all you're really paying for is a bigger battery.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, and I think there's a few markets here. So we were talking about the kind of intercity car, or intra-city, so driving around the city. You don't need a big battery, right? So as a second car, if it can go 30 miles,
Yes.
that's probably sufficient. But as soon as you're going further than that, you do need a much longer range. And I think Tesla are one of the few, and I know there are others, but they're the kind of big famous one, that have made it that you can go miles in these cars.
Okay, so that's the kind of cars covered, but let's talk about something that's a little bit controversial for me, and that's the zero emissions aspect of it.
Okay.
Is it really zero emissions?
It depends how you charge them.
Exactly. I was waiting for the answer.
So in the States, in California, this is like perfect, right? Because it's sunny all the time, and they have massive houses, so they've got loads of space for solar panels, they get them on, and that is zero emission. Although you have to produce the solar panels and you have to produce the batteries. But just putting that aside,
the running of it, in theory, at the point of when you're charging them, is zero emissions, but not necessarily
but
the
I
production
think
and the.
Here in the UK, where it's less sunny, I think you're right. You're having to get the electricity from somewhere, and that typically is burning gas in the gas power stations,
or
nuclear power, coal. I think we're into our 4th week or something with no coal producing power.
But in theory, say in the winter when solar energy is low.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think you're right. They're not completely green. However, producing electricity on a much bigger scale is obviously more efficient than lots of little engines.
So in theory, if I had my Nissan Leaf or Renault Zoe or the BMW i3 or Golf.
Is the Renault Zoe, that's that tiny little one that looks kind of like a quad bike.
No, it's the kind of Clio.
What's it? No, Twiggy. Renault Twiggy?
Something like that.
So you see some of the estate agents have them in London?
Yes, because that makes sense what you were just saying.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
So the best possible scenario is I am next to a wind farm. I've got my electric car. That's the nearest point where I generate electricity.
You own the wind farm.
I own the wind farm.
Yeah.
And also my electricity tariff is a renewables tariff from an energy supplier. That's the best possible outcome.
Yes.
The next best possible outcome is I live in theory next to a coal-fired power station or a gas-fired power station, but I'm feeling I'm more into the environment, and I don't mind paying a bit extra on my fuel. So I'm on the renewables tariff from the energy supplier.
Yeah.
And I've got my electric car. But then the worst possible outcome is I'm none of those. I'm just on the cheapest tariff. I've got my electric car, but I'm feeding it from a coal-fired power station.
Okay, so with battery electrical cars, or maybe we'll do this at the end, but no, let's do it now. With battery electric cars, who are they suitable for?
Suitable for it depends on the use. Yeah, what we've just said. So.
Well, let's just go. So people driving around little cities.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Local commutes to your work.
Yeah. If you are going on a longer journey, you are going to have to shell out for a bigger car. As in a more expensive car because the batteries tend to be bigger. The Tesla Model 3 has just come out. I saw some pictures on Twitter that they're just landed in the UK now, and they're relatively cheap, but they've still got decent range. I know that all of the other manufacturers are bringing out these cars, but they are not suitable. So a fully battery-powered car aren't suitable for people, essentially commuters, who are commuting from city to city. Because they just don't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and I'd say, and then even on the commercial front, there's not yet, I'd say, technology to kind of replacing your vans and your trucks and machinery like that. I think when we get to that point, that's when it's going to be really telling, because that's the area where it's very emissions heavy.
Although we have electric forklifts in our warehouses.
Yes.
And they are good. Because obviously you're inside, right? So I remember when we had that first warehouse, we had a gas cylinder on the back of the forklift, and it's not great, is it?
Well, because it was for the yard, so it was external, so you could use it externally.
Okay, moving on then. So that's battery electrical vehicles. So all battery. right? Then we move on to your hybrid electric vehicle. So do you remember when I turned up to work in my hybrid?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was it the Hyundai?
No, not Hyundai. What's
Toyota?
Toyota, but it wasn't
Auris?
the Prius. It was the one smaller.
Auris.
No. What the hell was it? I should definitely remember the make of my car. I have a memory like a golf.
But anyway, so it's hybrids making use of two engines, conventional petrol engine and electrical top-up motor.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you're plodding along, the two motors modulate between electrical power and conventional fuel power.
Mm-hmm.
Petrol-driven engines. I've no idea why they're not diesel, but I guess it must be complexity of making hybrid engines out of that. But the first time I ever encountered one was probably the time when we were at Sky, 2000
Green Tomato. That
2007, the cab company.
Yeah, and now Uber, obviously.
Yes.
All their drivers, the Prius. So I had one. They're great, right? You don't need to charge them, right? So it's not like you need to plug this thing in ever. It will basically increase your miles per gallon. Yeah, so it increases the efficiency of your car. Especially if you're driving around cities and that sort of thing. So if I'm lots of stop and start, that typically is where you get really low.
Which is bad for, because we talk about this,
cars.
because you tell me how many miles am I getting, but I tend to do a lot more motorway driving. So there, I seem to get kind of stability of,
Yaris. That's what I drove.
Yaris, that's it.
Toyota Yaris.
In terms of the how much I kind of rev the engine and all that stuff, and then I seem to do intercity more than you. So your efficiency is lower, mine is higher.
Yeah.
But then, as you said, that going back to the hybrids, it's quite good for that city type drive. But as soon as you get onto the motorways, you're using the petrol side.
But so when you're basically slowing down, it's charging the battery.
Yes.
Yeah, that's essentially how that's working. You were gonna. Do you want to do the KERS thing?
Well, KERS was it's the Kinetic Energy Recovery System. So that was first pioneered in Formula One racing. So essentially, it was when you are basically the normal engine, you're putting in a fuel that's driving the engine, that's driving the wheel shaft, and that's pulling you forward.
Yeah.
But the concept of stopping also uses energy. Mm-hmm. Now in conventional cars, we just use that. We have a wheel and a brake pad, and disc brakes. And when you stop, they get really hot, and then that motion just releases a lot of heat energy. Mm-hmm. But the concept of it, from when you're stopping and starting, or starting to stopping, that's using a lot of excess energy that could be used somewhere else. Basically what it's doing is flipping the motor, so it acts as a generator. So remember in your science, a generator is an inverse motor. That then takes kinetic energy, converts into an electrical charge, and then that feeds it into a battery which can be used.
And this is one of the reasons you like Formula One, isn't it? Because it was basically they make all these weird things like this, and then they feed them into the mainstream.
So cool. That's why you've got a lot of manufacturers in there that basically sponsor the teams, because they know they will use that technology on their road technology, and that's where they'll sort of make their money. So the Formula One is just basically they're spending lots of R&D to then recoup that over the years and decades on kind of conventional vehicles. But it's as we were kind of saying before when I was talking about the battery, because it's more efficient to discharge than charge. The problem is, although the recovery system recovers some of that kinetic energy lost, because you've got you can't kind of rapidly charge the battery straight away with all that massive energy. It only takes a certain amount of it. That's why you might say top up your electric battery by 5 to 10%, just depending on how you drive.
Okay.
So it's not a given how much you can recover, but it's obviously there as a kind of a nifty little trick.
So we've got benefits here. You don't need to plug them in, right? So you're putting petrol in the car, and that is how it's being used to run. You have greater fuel efficiency than a purely petrol car or diesel car.
In city driving.
And therefore you're not really bound by this kind of range issue.
Yes.
There is a range issue. They run out of fuel eventually, right? But then I can charge them.
With petrol.
With petrol. Sorry, with petrol. But one of the cool things was when I did it once, ran out of fuel, and I've only run out of fuel once. With the little hybrid I had, there's a button that takes it into electric vehicle mode.
Yeah.
And you only get about a mile.
Right.
But it allowed me to hobble to a petrol station.
Right. Okay.
And then could charge again. So it can run in purely electric mode, but as you say, you get like a mile out of it.
But if you're worried about emissions, the constraint side of it's obviously, when it's burning the petrol, it's still going to be creating emissions. So it's not an emissions free, but it's slightly better.
And also, we didn't really talk about costs in terms of fully electric cars. They are more expensive typically than their petrol cousins.
Mm-hmm.
But the hybrids are, again, they're more expensive. So you may well spend £5,000 more on a similar car to get a hybrid version. And
they do, which is interesting. A lot of the major manufacturers out there, they have a kind of same chassis.
Mm-hmm.
So a 3 model or a 5 model or a 7 model. And then they'll have variations within that. So they'll have, your starter petrol engine, then they'll have a kind of diesel long range. So if you do a lot of motorway driving, then they'll have a hybrid. So you can, depending upon your pricing point and your preference, go for the chassis with the type of motor that you're after.
So the third type is the plug-in hybrid, right? So this is very similar to my hybrid. It's got 2 engines, essentially, electric. So 2 motors, 2 engines. Electric and a petrol. The difference is that there is a bigger battery in it.
Yeah.
And so as well as the kind of braking charging that you were talking about earlier, you can also charge this bigger battery by plugging it in, and you get a very short range in terms of miles.
Typically like 30, 40 miles. So I know the Outlander, the Mitsubishi. It's quite a popular one.
Yes.
Great car. Very expensive.
It is a good car. Very expensive, we've found out, by having one of those on our books.
Yes.
But they, as you say, they work really well. I think one of the issues because we had one on our work fleet here, but they weren't, we didn't have a charging point at work.
Yes.
So we had a charging point at the guy's home, which was fine. So he could charge it when he was at home. But then he drove here and then couldn't charge it. So all in all, didn't really work for us. But I think for a lot of people it'd be a great idea.
The difference here to a normal hybrid is you can actually set. I know obviously you're talking about a little Toyota there because you're really desperate at the end. So obviously that was probably a kind of a button of last resort. But here you can, provided the electric motor is charged or it has a charge or has a bit to go on it and you've got fuel in the tank, you can alternate between the two. So you can actually say, right, I'm going to go fully electric now, and then it will use the kind of 30, 40 miles and just use the electric motor basically.
Which is awesome. So if I'm therefore commuting slightly further, so if I was going from London to Reading, for example, and I could probably get almost all the way there electric, a tiny bit of petrol, charge at the other end, get almost all the way home, tiny bit of petrol at the end, and do that. And because it's cheaper to run on the electric,
or even I'd say do all your sightseeing in electric when you're in the Bristol or whatever or that place, and then do your
petrol
on the way.
Okay, so there's strategies when we're talking electric vehicles. There are strategies in driving techniques.
But I'm because I do a lot of lift and coasting because I try to drive efficiently.
Isn't coasting, as far as I remember when I was taught to drive, coasting is bad?
If you've got a manual vehicle,
okay,
not necessarily an automatic.
Harry, have you got any comments on driving? Why is this funny?
I'm very excited to book my first driving test at the age of 27.
Driving lesson. I failed a couple of times, so it doesn't. I'm not going to pass first time.
Second time pass.
Second time pass. So you don't have a huge amount to say this week. You're just keeping quiet in the corner.
No, but what I was just going to say, because I was driving the Mitsubishi Outlander, and I always found, because my driving style is I tend to, release the gas pedal quite a long distance before I hit, say, a junction or a roundabout, so I'd kind of slow gradually. And I was always wondering, well, why am I not getting any kind of regenerative energy back into the battery? It's just because my driving style was kind of soft.
Did your driving style also result in the scratch to
No,
the
it
alloys.
wasn't me.
That was
Wasn't me.
someone else, was it? Okay,
So,
fine.
A lot of people
Became
use
a
that car.
very expensive car.
Yeah.
Anyway, so a couple of examples. Chevy
So
Volt,
basically, you've got to brake quite heavily to
quickly
generate
to
that.
generate electricity. Toyota Prius, there is a plug-in version of that. It's obviously a little bit more expensive than the non-plug-in version, but they're a good idea. They kind of work well. So then we move on to extended range electrical vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to tell us what
Slight nuance there. Whereas the plug-in hybrids let you alternate between, you've kind of got that choice. Here, it will run on the electric motor and exhaust it up to its kind of maximum.
runs it all the time?
Maximum point until it's exhausted, and then eventually it will kick in on the conventional side.
Okay.
Because it's still got a fuel tank. That's my understanding of it.
So my understanding of it is that it's the electric side is always driving it.
Yes.
But
It uses the petrol to charge it.
if you kind of run out of the
electric charge,
then it recharges the battery using the combustion engine.
Okay.
which doesn't sound particularly efficient in my mind, but obviously it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't make them.
But also, I'm sure at some point, the way you're driving, it would.
No, it's running on electric. It literally runs on electric. So the batteries are powering the engine, powering the car, powering your motion, and your petrol. It's basically running as a generator to charge the battery that is then running the car.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird to get your head around.
But what if it's on like 0.01%?
Oh God, you're so annoying. But honestly, oh man, but you will still use the petrol engine will charge that.
Okay.
You might have to sit there till it gets to 1%.
I think the cars are smarter than that.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, it wouldn't go down to 0.1% because.
Well, I'm just thinking if you're doing motorway driving, a wall.
Like 5%.
Right, and that's when it kicks in the
Right.
presumably.
Okay, so...
Listen, I will clarify that because I'm sure if you're doing, say, long intercity, and because of the limitations of the charge on a conventional battery in relation to its discharge, surely...
No, but because you were saying that, right? You were saying the charge-discharge thing. But if I drive a Tesla 200 miles, yeah, to drive 200 miles takes me at 70 miles an hour takes approximately 3 hours.
Yes.
Yeah. If I'm going via, one of these average speed zones in the motorway, it probably takes about 6 hours.
Yes.
But ignoring that, so normally it takes about 3 hours. To charge it, I can charge the car in 20 minutes. And so I don't understand the discharge charge thing.
Okay.
But you're I want to say physician, but you're not a doctor.
No,
but
I'm
you're a
an
physics
economist, but nothing to do with.
Okay,
Physics.
I forget. You're so talented in so many things. I just forget.
Yeah, thank you, James.
So
I saw that.
So therefore, actually, it could, in theory, you could always be charging your battery.
Yes.
With your petrol motor.
In theory, yeah.
But
yeah, they have pure electric range up to pure electric 125 miles, and then I guess what you're saying about the petrol engine kicking in, acting as the generator.
Should we clarify this next week?
But I think if you're going like to Manchester without stopping, surely it's got to get to a point where the electric engine is going to be discharged to a point where
no, because the electric is always charging it.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe we'll call Vauxhall on that and just get them to clarify that point, or Chevrolet.
Right, yeah, I think it's the Vauxhall Ampera and the Chevrolet Volt.
But I do remember the Ampera. It's been around for...
It has been around for a while.
Yeah, it's probably up to its kind of second or third.
There's a couple of BMW models that use the same principle as well, the i3 and the i8.
I'd really like an i8. If anyone out there is wondering...
Would like to gift James an extremely expensive vehicle.
I would love an i8.
He would love it.
Anyway, right, fuel cells. Okay, so...
Interesting, that one.
It is interesting.
Where did you see the first fuel cell?
On the Isle of Wight.
Yes, well done, James. Good memory.
And you can talk more about them than me. Go on, explain to me how fuel cells... No, but that was hydrogen.
Yeah.
Right, so what they wanted to do was split... they literally split water to make, with electricity, to make hydrogen and oxygen. Then they burnt it to make water. They were using hydrogen as a fuel.
Yeah.
These fuel cells are producing power from the chemical reaction of splitting it, aren't they? Like the fuel cell boilers, like CHP boilers, which you're a big fan of.
Yeah.
So they're running slightly differently. Because actually, if you can imagine, we had the infrastructure to pump hydrogen into, you turned up at a hydrogen station, filled your car with liquid hydrogen, and then drove off, it would be incredibly clean.
Well, that's what it says in the memo, it requires hydrogen.
Yeah, but you've got to make hydrogen.
Yes. So again, you need electricity to
make it.
To make it, yes.
And it's really expensive to make it at the moment.
At the minute, yeah.
And that chap who we were speaking to was very excited about it. But he had this. It was like a massive container, right? And they were making sort of a cupful of hydrogen a day.
Yes.
From this massive thing. So
if you remember back in your history, why do they don't make hot air balloons out of hydrogen? The old Hindenburg, 1935.
Yeah, it didn't go well, that.
Just exploded. That's why they're made out of helium these days.
But shows that, they could power a car.
Yes, but the hydrogen fuel cell car powered on hydrogen fuel, in theory, to say that, if we had hydrogen filling stations, it could all be controlled and stable, etc., etc. In theory, that would solve the intercity challenge. So you kind of use your electric cars for your within the city and your local commutes, and then your hydrogen for long distances.
But you could, in theory, as you were talking there, if you had the infrastructure. If I went from town to town or village to village and there were electric charging points everywhere, then...
It's a hell of a lot of coffee stopovers.
It is. I think that's the benefit of petrol, diesel and hydrogen.
Yeah.
In theory, I can just plug them in and I can go. One thing that I did listen to here, which was quite a cool idea, is basically you drive in and the battery drops out the bottom of your car, new battery goes in and you're off, which is quite a cool thing. But you obviously wonder how the person's treated the battery in your car. Do you know what I mean? So there's that potential risk with it.
And there's also, I suppose...
people stealing batteries.
Well, I was going to say compatibility between models and...
Yeah, no, of course.
Sizing.
But it's quite a nice idea.
Yeah.
It would take a crazy amount of government intervention and money and whatnot.
They love that. But it would be a really interesting idea, because then you'd get round all of this issue of, as you say, having to stop 30 times between here and Edinburgh. And I do think it's a nice idea.
It's good for Costa and Starbucks.
Yeah, and other independent coffee stores that are also available.
On motorway service stations.
Are we not being able to get Starbucks to sponsor us yet?
Not yet. We're talking to them.
Darn.
But I think it's the resulting emissions from hydrogen burning or fuel selling.
Yes.
Water
vapour
is a pretty cool thing.
So out of those 5 categories, what would you? So if you were to, obviously you had a hybrid.
So I had a
before.
hybrid, and I really, really liked it.
Would you like an electric?
I'd like an i8.
Yeah.
Please. That's all I know. I will buy, and this is on the honest truth. So I have at the moment, I have a lease car, and I got a diesel, right? Which is boo because they're bad.
Yes.
So I went from a hybrid to that. I will go back. So in sort of 2022.
But that's because of family and lifestyle. So you do a lot of on the weekends and stuff. You go to see family and all that stuff. So electric is not practical from...
Well, it kind of is, but you've got to buy a big electric car.
If you get the Tesla X, that's got a maximum range of 351 miles.
It's still not that much, because that's 351 miles. Because when I said I can get 600 miles out of my car, that's what it says.
Yeah.
I never get close to that. So it's the same with electric cars. You don't get that unless you're driving at like 42 miles an hour, whatever it says in there, optimum, and all the wind is going behind you and all this sort of stuff. So it's not that far, I think. So I still think that's a bit of an issue. But they look cool. Right? So I drive one. My next car will be, because I think in 2022, like Volvo are bringing out all of their cars are going to have to be slightly hybrid related.
Yeah, and
Jag, I'm naming nice cars.
But it's important to say the regulations in this. So London has got the ultra low emission zone, which prohibits certain types of vehicles with old emission standards entering into the city for free, essentially. So you've got the congestion charge, and now you've got this top up. So it's incentivizing business owners and individuals to go for cleaner vehicles going forward.
Yeah. And
London might be just, the type of typical model for all the cities around the UK to adapt. So, you might get to, 2025, and it might just be impossible to drive a diesel.
But it might almost be impossible to find a diesel.
Yeah.
Unless it's an old car.
Yes.
I think that's the point I was getting at. All the companies are really trying to push towards this.
And there is a bit of sadness to all of that, because I think in the last 12 months, and I don't know quite the figures, but I think there's been at least 2 production lines turned off. I think one was a Nissan one and the other one's in Ford. Because, they were making diesel cars, and European regulations or UK regulations are such that because of emissions, I think the next cars are going to be more hybrid focused.
But I assume it wasn't blamed on them hybrids.
There's other things blamed on it, but it's important to say why they're potentially closed. But
the government have said they want to stop all petrol or diesel cars by 2040. But then with all the climate change stuff that's been going on at the moment, they've been pressured to bring that down to 2030. That seems kind of soon.
But you can't force someone if they are having to drive for livelihood and they cannot afford, which most people can't, to spend £25,000 on a new car, then you can say we're going to do this, but good luck doing it unless you're going to give them an electric car each.
I agree. I do think it's fairly empty words because they're not really putting anything behind it. They've also, last autumn, they reduced some of the grants and whatnot they were doing towards electric vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles. It used to be that there were 3 different categories of low emission cars that you could qualify, and you could get up to, I think when it first started, you could get up to £5,000.
Yeah.
And now they've reduced it down. There's a lot fewer cars that qualify for it, and you can only get £3,500.
But do you think in some way that's because the early cars that came out, just sort of early electric cars and hybrid cars, were early adopters, were jumping on the bandwagon. They were like, I have to drive a green electric car, right? And so the car companies were like, well, let's make these cars more expensive. Because I can't believe the technology is more expensive. It seems to me a battery-powered car, like battery motors are about the most simple things on the planet. They can't really go wrong, apart from batteries exploding, which is a bad one. But they're very, very simple to make. So I feel, and yes, the batteries are expensive, but I feel that if a car company was forced to, they could sell their electric vehicles and hybrid cars at the same price as a standard car. But why bother when, number one, early adopters are going to jump on the bandwagon and get one, but number 2, there's this £5,000 to do it. So if I'm willing to pay £25,000 for a car, but I get £5,000 off, perfect no-brainer. You know what I mean? I feel that the manufacturers need to do their bit to help drive uptake as well. And that is, if I go to a forecourt and pick a new car, and I've got a Golf electric and a Golf, and they're the same price, I'd take the Golf electric. I wouldn't think twice.
Well, it's a £3,500 grant if it's a zero emissions. So at the minute, zero emissions vehicle that does 70 or more miles on a charge, so you can get a £3,500 grant. And there's different rules for other.
What do you think is going to happen to? Well, I think we're running out of time now. But what do you think is going to happen with Tesla? Do you think it's going to work, or do you think it's going to collapse?
When the company itself,
what they're trying to do.
I think it's novel. I think maybe they had to be ambitious in what Elon Musk was saying in terms of how he wanted to change stuff. If he wasn't ambitious, then he wouldn't have got so far as to where he's got to. But I think.
Do you think we should invite Elon Musk come and speak on our
Listen,
podcast.
if you want to talk for Elon for an hour and a half, come down to the green room. Absolutely.
Right, and where would Mr. Musk listen to our podcast?
He can actually find us on many different avenues, but I always, so forgetful, just like yourself, James, in terms of the cars that you've owned in the past. I always go over to the Green Age website. So I go www.thegreenage.co.uk. I load the website. I go to the top. Next to the energy saving guides on the right-hand side, I see our podcast. I click onto that, and then there's reams and different ways of what you can find and listen to us.
Stitcher.
Yeah. Tune in radio.
Podbean.
Yes. Apple
Podcasts.
Although they are changing that now, aren't they?
No, so it's still called podcasts at the moment.
Still at the moment. But
Spotify.
Yep.
That's it. Really.
And then obviously
but
YouTube.
Loads of ways.
YouTube if you want to watch
that.
us as well.
Not Harry though. Soon you'll see Harry.
Yes.
Cool. And then energy saving news. There is a fair bit in the...
Well, we talked about the 2050.
Yeah, and I think that's that could be enormous, and I think a lot of various different bits will fall out of that. And I think potentially a bigger topic that we need to discuss in a bit more detail.
Yeah, well, and just kind of in summary, so to reduce it, we've got to do three different things. We're going to reduce three different. So one is from emissions through our properties and housing, so that's about a third. Reduction in emissions through transportation, so we're talking a lot about electric vehicles, and the third one is emissions through the industrial processes, so factories, power stations, etc. And then out of those, you've got different levers and things to
which we can discuss at a later date.
Yes.
Is there anything else from anyone?
No, I think we'll cover charging points for electric vehicles on an upcoming podcast.
Okay. Cool.
Just thoroughly interesting.
Perfect.
The infrastructure of it. So it's one thing having a car, it's another thing to be able to charge it.
Very good. Right, well that's it then for this week. So thank you very much for listening or watching. And if you're interested in subscribing, Nick has told you various different mechanisms that you can do that.
And if you're interested in commenting, where can they comment?
You can comment on Facebook, you can comment on YouTube, you can comment anywhere, really. And we will try and reply to as many of these messages as we can. Fortunately, at the moment, everyone's been relatively positive.
Yes.
But I'm sure a troll will eventually find us.
Yes.
But no,
Looking
that's
forward
it.
to that.
That's it for this week. So thank you very much.